You probably think you've stopped checking. You're not looking for signs anymore. You're not constantly going back to the same thoughts. You're not asking yourself if it's working every 5 minutes. And compared to how you used to be, that's true. But there's a more subtle form of checking that most people don't notice. And it doesn't look like what you expect. It doesn't feel obsessive. It doesn't feel urgent. In fact, it can feel completely normal. It shows up in small moments, moments where nothing seems wrong, but your attention quietly turns back toward yourself. Not to fix anything, just to see where you are. You might notice it when you pause for a second and think, how do I feel about this right now? Or when something happens, and instead of just responding, you briefly check your internal state first. Not in an obvious way, just enough to confirm that you're still good. And that's the part that goes unnoticed, because it doesn't feel like doubt. It feels like awareness. But there's a difference between being aware and constantly referencing yourself. And that reference point, even when it's subtle, keeps your attention slightly anchored to monitoring instead of just being, let me show you what this looks like in real situations. You might be moving through your day normally, handling things, making decisions, talking to people, and everything feels fine. But then there's a small pause, a moment where nothing is happening. And instead of just continuing, your attention turns inward. You check where you are, not because something is wrong, but because that's what you've been used to doing. It's almost automatic. Another way this shows up is right after something goes well. You handle a situation smoothly, you respond differently than you used to. And for a second, instead of just moving on, you notice it, you register it. You think, okay, that felt right. Again, not intense, not obsessive, but it's still a form of checking because your attention is going back to evaluate instead of just continuing forward. There's also a quieter version of this where nothing specific even happens, but there's a subtle sense of waiting, not waiting for something big, just a slight anticipation, like part of your attention is still open, watching for confirmation. And this is where it gets tricky, because none of this feels like the old version of checking. It's not anxious, it's not repetitive, it's not draining. So it's easy to assume it's not there anymore, but the behavior hasn't fully disappeared. It's just become more refined, more subtle. And because of that, it can quietly keep you in a loop of observation instead of allowing full immersion. This doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means your system is still used to referencing itself, still used to making sure everything is on track. But the manifesting state doesn't require that kind of monitoring. It doesn't need confirmation. It doesn't need to be checked. It stabilizes when your attention stops returning to it. Not forcefully, but naturally. And that shift happens when you stop treating your internal state like something that needs to be observed, even in small ways. Because the more you check, even subtly, the more you reinforce the idea that there's something to check on. And that keeps a layer of distance between you and fully being in the state. But when that reference point starts to fade, something else happens. You stop thinking about where you are. You stop noticing whether things feel right. You stop tracking your internal state altogether. And not because you're avoiding it, but because your attention is fully engaged with what's in front of you. You're just moving, responding, deciding, without needing to confirm anything along the way. That's when the shift becomes complete. Not when you feel perfect, not when you eliminate every thought, but when you stop returning to yourself for validation. So, if you think you've stopped checking, look a little closer. Not for obvious patterns, but for the subtle ones, the quick internal glances, the quiet evaluations, the moments of just making sure, because those are the last pieces to fall away. And once they do, there's nothing left to monitor, only the state itself. Subscribe and enter your manifesting state.